My name is Meredith. I'm 22 years old, and my father just traded my heartbeat for a new car. While I gasped for air, he called me dramatic. My mother turned on her camera for likes, and my sister laughed at my fate. They chose a machine over their own blood, never realizing that a homeless man with a rusty tin box would be the one to buy my soul back from the dark, or that I'd survive to strip them of every single thing they love. But before the screams and the sirens, there was only the suffocating, silent weight of their wealth. The crystal chandeliers of the Peninsula Chicago rooftop hummed with a golden, predatory light. It was a sound I felt in my teeth, a vibration of wealth so thick it felt like it was stealing the very oxygen from the room. My father, Lyle, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his posture as rigid and polished as the silverware. To his right, Dahlia, my mother, was adjusted her pearls, her eyes scanning the room not for friends, but for witnesses to her perfection. They were celebrating 30 years of a marriage built on a foundation of curated appearances and calculated silences. I sat at the end of the table, as if forgotten in the family, clutching my chest as a steady, heavy thud began to echo behind my ribcage. It wasn't the usual anxiety. It was a physical weight, a cold, iron fist squeezing my heart until my vision began to blur. The gilded patterns on the wall seemed heavier than the air in my lungs. I tried to breathe, but the air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the metallic taste of my own fear. "Sit up straight," Dahlia whispered, her smile unchanged as she nodded to a passing lady. "You look so tired, and that's ruining the atmosphere of the meal." I tried to respond, but my throat was a desert. I looked at Lyle, hoping for a shred of the protection a father is supposed to provide. Instead, he was leaning toward a business associate, his voice booming with a pride he never reserved for me. "The ultra-white vegan leather," Lyle said, his fingers tracing an imaginary steering wheel. "I reserved the plaid model this morning. It's not just a car, it's a statement of where we are now. Only the best for this family." He spoke about that machine as if it were the son he never had, his eyes sparkling with a warmth that died the moment they flickered toward me. "In this family, you aren't loved for your soul. You are loved for how well you reflect their light." I was just a shadow they had forgotten to dim, a glitch in the software of their perfect life. The pressure in my chest spiked. A white-hot needle pierced my sternum and the world tilted. I reached for my water glass, my fingers numb and clumsy. The crystal slipped, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. The table went silent, but no one moved toward me. "Good heavens," Callista snapped, her voice so sharp it could draw blood. "Are you always this clumsy? You're making a fuss." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I slumped forward, my shoulder hitting the edge of the table before I slid to the floor. My heart wasn't beating anymore. It was vibrating, a frantic, broken bird trapped in a cage of bone. Have you ever trusted someone you shouldn't have? Have you ever realized in a single moment of vulnerability that the people who were supposed to be your safety net were actually the ones holding the scissors? As I lay on the cold marble, gasping for a breath that wouldn't come, I saw my mother's hand reach for her purse. For a fleeting, foolish second, I thought she was grabbing her inhaler or her phone to call 911, but she didn't dial for help. Dahlia stood up, her face a mask of practiced concern, and held her iPhone high. The bright flash of the camera lens blinded me. She wasn't saving her daughter, she was opening her Instagram live. "Oh, my followers, please pray for my youngest," Dahlia cooed into the microphone, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet theatricality. "She's having another one of her episodes. It's so hard being a mother to such a dramatic soul, but we stay strong for the family, don't we?" Callista stepped into the frame, leaning over me not to check my pulse, but to adjust the hem of her designer skirt. She whispered down at me, her breath smelling of mint and malice. "Try to look less messy, Meredith. 10,000 people are watching this. Don't embarrass us more than you already have." I looked into that camera lens, my vision narrowing into a dark tunnel. I saw Lyle in the background. He wasn't looking at me at all. He was checking his Rolex, his brow furrowed in genuine irritation. "Lyle, the paramedics are going to be a distraction," Dahlia said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "I know," Lyle grumbled, waving over a waiter. "This whole stunt is going to delay the delivery of the celebratory dessert. I have a 9 p.m. appointment at the showroom. I'm not missing the handover of that car because she decided to be dramatic tonight. The coldness of his words hit me harder than the physical pain. A limp will teach responsibility, my mother had once said about a childhood injury. Tonight, they were teaching me something else. They were teaching me that my life was a mere scheduling conflict in the itinerary of their greed. I summoned every ounce of strength left in my fading consciousness. I looked directly into my mother's camera, my voice a ghost of a whisper. I hope the likes are worth the cost of your soul, Mom. I'll pray you never have to feel as alone as you've made me tonight. Her hand trembled for a fraction of a second, but the light of the screen was too addictive to turn off. I felt my spirit begin to drift, the muffled sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull roar. The paramedics finally burst through the doors, but they weren't there because of my family. A horrified stranger from the next table had seen the livestream on her own feed and called for help from 10 feet away. As they lifted me onto the gurney, the oxygen mask pressing against my face, I heard the final blow. It was the sound of a door closing. Not a physical door, but the door to my heart. We can't ride in the ambulance, Lyle told the EMT, his voice flat and final. We have a legal appointment at the Tesla showroom before they close. Just take her to the county hospital. We'll check on her tomorrow if we have time. True wealth isn't what's in your bank account or the car in your driveway. It's whose hand you're holding when the world goes dark. Tonight, my hands were empty. But as the elevator doors closed on their flashes and their finery, my heart finally knew the truth. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been erased. The ambulance doors slammed shut, cutting off the flashes of her mother's phone, leaving Meredith in a silence more painful than her failing heart. I stared at the flickering fluorescent light on the ceiling, feeling the vibration of the tires against the Chicago asphalt. My family was gone, chasing the scent of fresh leather and the status of a new car, leaving me to navigate the threshold of existence alone. The paramedic was a blur of blue polyester and efficient movements, his hands steady as he checked my vitals, but I could see the pity in his eyes. It was a look I would soon become intimately familiar with, the expression of a stranger who cared more about my survival than the people who shared my DNA. When the doors finally swung open, the humid, exhaust-heavy air of the city was replaced by the biting scent of industrial disinfectant. I was wheeled through the emergency entrance of a public hospital, a place of gray linoleum and weary faces. Every jolt of the gurney sent a spike of agony through my chest, a reminder that my heart was failing, a mechanical defect that didn't care about my family's social calendar. They moved me into a frantic ER bay, where the air was thick with the hum of monitors and the muffled cries of other broken souls. The doctor was a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that brooked no nonsense. She leaned over me, her stethoscope cold against my skin. Meredith, can you hear me? Your heart is in critical failure. You have a congenital defect that has reached a breaking point. We need to operate. Tonight. She didn't sugarcoat it. In the sterile light, my skin looked like parchment, pale and translucent, a map of a life spent trying to be invisible. She explained the necessity of a $10,000 down payment for the emergency procedure, a bureaucratic hurdle of insurance and risk that stood between me and a second chance. I was still trying to process the numbers when the curtain was ripped back. Lyle didn't rush in with the frantic energy of a worried father. He walked in with his jaw set, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He looked at the monitors, then at the doctor, as if we were all part of an elaborate scheme to ruin his evening. $10,000? He barked, the sound echoing off the metal trays. We just spent our liquid assets on the Tesla deposit. The funds are tied up. It's non-refundable. I watched him through a haze of pain and medication. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the bill the nurse was holding. I used to think the most expensive thing in this world was gold or precious stones. I was wrong. The most expensive thing in existence is the mercy a father refuses his own daughter. It is a debt that can never be repaid, a vacuum that sucks the warmth out of the room. Mr. Vance, your daughter will not survive the night without this surgery, the doctor said, her voice dropping an octave in warning. Lyle didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his phone and hit a speed dial. Security? Yes, I need officers in the ER bay. My daughter, Meredith, is having another one of her episodes. She's a troubled, pathological liar. She's faking a medical crisis to extort money from me." He spoke loudly, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who had convinced himself of his own lies. He began providing the arriving security and a nearby police officer with evidence of my past dramatic behavior, painting a picture of a girl who cried wolf until the world stopped listening. He was signing against medical advice waivers, legally distancing himself from my body as if I were a defective product he was returning to the factory. The flicker of the fluorescent lights above felt like a strobe, illuminating the harsh shadows of the room. The indignity was a physical weight, heavier than the fluid in my lungs. Just as the security officers began to look at me with suspicion, the curtain moved again. Callista swept in, her $2,000 designer coat fluttering behind her like a shroud. She didn't ask if I was in pain. She didn't touch my hand. She held up her phone, the camera lens a cold, unblinking eye. "Urban pain," she whispered, her voice airy and detached. "The lighting in here is actually perfect for the aesthetic. So raw, so visceral." She was recording my struggling breaths, capturing the fog on my oxygen mask for her digital portfolio. "Callista, please," I rasped, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. She laughed, a sharp melodic sound that felt like a slap. "Oh, Meredith, don't be so sensitive. If it's fate for you to go, then it's fate. Honestly, dying now would be a blessing for everyone. It saves the family from the financial embarrassment of a long-term invalid. Just let go. It's easier." I looked at her, really looked at her, through the fog of my own fading strength. "I don't hate you for being cruel, Callista," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I pity you. I pity you for being so empty that you need my pain to feel full. I hope you never have to survive your own family. I hope you never have to see the person you've become through the eyes of someone who loved you." She flinched, but only for a second, before she adjusted the angle of her phone. The police officers, influenced by Lyle's narrative and Callista's indifference, treated me with a cold, professional suspicion. They refused to let me make a call, standing guard as Lyle finished the paperwork that effectively orphaned me in a room full of strangers. "We have to get to the showroom," Lyle said, checking his watch. "The 9 p.m. appointment is firm. They don't hold the handover for anyone." They walked out without a backward glance, the heavy fabric of the curtains swinging shut behind them. I was left in the dark, the heart rate monitor beginning a panicked, high-pitched rhythm. The nurses began discussing moving me to a low-priority ward, their voices hushed as they talked about the lack of payment. I felt the darkness closing in, a cold tide rising from my feet to my chest. Have you ever wondered what happens to the love that is never given? Does it just vanish, or does it turn into the very thing that eventually breaks you? I stared at the reflection in the hallway window, a ghost of myself framed by the sterile corridor. Then I saw it. A ragged figure standing in the periphery, a shadow that didn't belong in the clean world of the hospital. It was Odin. He was dressed in layers of worn fabric, his face etched with the lines of a life lived on the streets of Chicago, but his eyes were fixed on my room. Life isn't about the people who cheer for you when you are standing in the sun. It is about the one person who finds you in the dark when you have absolutely nothing left to offer. I watched as a rough, calloused hand reached out to touch the cold glass of my isolation room. He was holding a battered tin box, a relic that smelled of rain and old metal. But to me, it looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The rhythmic thud in my chest was no longer a countdown to an end. It was a drumbeat, a call to a war I was finally ready to fight. As the hospital monitors began a frantic, high-pitched wail, the air in the public ward grew thick with the scent of impending finality. My vision was swimming in a sea of gray, the distant chatter of the nurses sounding like they were underwater. Just as the darkness began to pull at my sleeves, the heavy door groaned open. A figure stood in the threshold, silhouetted by the harsh hallway light. It wasn't the polished, expensive figure of my father Lyle, or the curated elegance of Dahlia. It was Odin. He bypassed the suspicious nurse at the station with a quiet, practiced invisibility born of living on the streets. His hands, scarred and blackened by years of hauling scrap metal, were trembling as he approached my bedside. He didn't say a word at first. He simply placed a battered, rusty tin box on the plastic table. It smelled of old copper in the cold Chicago rain. With a slow, deliberate movement, he pried the lid open, revealing a thick, chaotic stack of crumpled $5 bills, tens, and loose change. It was exactly $10,000, the price of my life. "They say blood is thicker than water," Odin whispered, his voice like gravel grinding on silk. He took my cold hand in his grip surprisingly steady. But kindness is the only thing thick enough to stop a heart from stopping. "I've been saving this for 10 years, kiddo. Scrapping, freezing, waiting. I wanted to hire someone to find my own daughter, the one your father helped disappear from my life, but I realized tonight, I can't find her if I let you go." The revelation hit me harder than the cardiac arrest. Odin had spent a decade in the cold to buy back a fragment of his past, and he was handing it to me to ensure I had a future. He leaned closer, his eyes reflecting the sterile ceiling lights. "Lyle didn't just walk away from me, Meredith. He stole the inheritance. He swapped the wills when the old folks passed. That's why I'm on the sidewalk and he's in a mansion. He's a hollow man, and hollow things always break when the wind gets too high. Don't let them turn your light into their shadow." The hospital administration didn't care where the money came from, only that the gift from a third party was legally processed under the hospital's emergency funding statutes. The sudden payment triggered an automated alert on Lyle's phone, a ping he undoubtedly ignored as he toasted his new Tesla in a showroom across town. I was wheeled into the pre-op room as the midnight clock struck, the high-contrast lighting of the surgery theater feeling like a gateway between worlds. When the anesthesia finally pulled me under, I didn't go as a victim. I went as a witness. The surgery was a blur of cold steel and the hum of the bypass machine, but when I woke up, the haze of morphine couldn't dim the new, sharp focus behind my eyes. I didn't wake up with a victim's tears or the desperate hope for a parent's touch. I woke up with the strategic clarity of an auditor. I looked at the hospital's patient tablet, my fingers moving with a precision that surprised me. My first act wasn't to call home. It was to check my personal accounts. I found that while I was under the knife, Lyle had already attempted to freeze my meager savings, filing a legal claim that I was mentally unfit to protect the family estate. I no longer need their permission to exist. My life is earned through the sweat and sacrifice of an honest man, not by the insatiable greed of a father who treats my heartbeat as a mere expense. I am no longer the abandoned daughter. I hold the receipt for my own survival. Have you ever found kindness in the most unexpected place? Sometimes the person who saves you is the one the world has already thrown away. If you've ever felt like you were drowning in a sea of indifferent faces, you know that a single hand reached out in the dark is worth more than 1,000 words spoken in the sun. By dawn, I was sitting up, the first rays of the Chicago sun hitting the glass of the window. The skyline looked different, sharper, less intimidating. I thanked Odin with a squeeze of his hand, promising him that his redemption fund wouldn't just buy my life. It would buy our justice. I began to piece together the legal leverage he had provided. The swapped will wasn't just a family secret. It was a criminal act with a paper trail that Lyle had buried but never destroyed. True forgiveness isn't about letting a poisonous person back into your space. It is about refusing to let their poison dictate your heartbeat. I would walk again, not to follow the path they laid out for me, but to pave a road that led far away from their vanity. Every beat of my heart now felt like a ticking clock, a rhythmic, mechanical precision that echoed through the quiet ward. It was a countdown, not to an end, but to a beginning. My family had built their lives on a foundation of lies, and I was finally the one holding the shovel. Meredith's heart beats with a rhythmic, mechanical precision, a sound that echoes like a ticking clock marking the seconds until her family's built-in lies finally catch up to them. The air in the Vance family estate was cold, filtered through a high-end ventilation system that stripped the life out of every breath. 2 weeks had passed since the surgery, and I was back in my childhood bedroom, a space that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a sterile holding cell. My chest still felt like it was held together by wire and stubbornness, the surgical site a constant throbbing reminder of the price Odin had paid for my survival. I was physically weak, the simple act of sitting upright draining my reserves, but my mind had never been sharper. It was as if the new mechanical precision of my heart had recalibrated my entire existence. I was resting in the dim light of late afternoon when the heavy oak door creaked open. Lyle and Dahlia entered with a practiced, somber efficiency that immediately set my internal alarms ringing. They didn't come with tea or a blanket. Lyle held a slim digital tablet, the glow of the screen reflecting in his predatory eyes, while Dahlia stood back, already adjusting her phone on a small tripod. "Meredith, honey, you look so much better," Dahlia cooed, though her eyes were focused on the framing of the camera lens. "We need to handle some boring paperwork, just a standard medical insurance release so the hospital can formally settle that gift from your Uncle Odin." Lyle leaned over the bed, placing the tablet in front of me. "It's a lot of legal jargon, kiddo. Basically, it ensures the hospital doesn't come after us for the remaining balance. You're still a bit foggy from the opioids, so just sign here. We'll take care of the rest." I took the stylus, my hand trembling slightly, but I didn't sign. I blinked, forcing my vision to clear, and focused on the fine print buried beneath the bold headers. It wasn't an insurance release. It was a parental restitution agreement. The document mandated that I pay 70% of my future gross income to Lyle Vance as reimbursement for the social and emotional damages caused by my pathological health crisis. Furthermore, it contained a clause where I waived all future rights to my grandparents' estate, citing my unfitness to manage family assets. The sheer depravity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just trying to recover the money they never spent. They were trying to own my future. They viewed me as a liability they needed to liquidate. I looked at Lyle, seeing the desperate greed behind his fatherly mask. I knew I couldn't fight them physically. If I refused, he would simply wait until I slept or find another way to coerce me. I took a breath, feeling the mechanical click of the valve in my chest. I signed the tablet, but as I drew the final stroke of my name, I incorporated a subtle, jagged flourish, a forced signature marker I had learned during my forensic accounting internship. To any casual observer, it looked like a shaky hand. To a court of law or a professional auditor, it was a loud, clear signal that the document was signed under duress. They think they are catching a bird in a cage. They don't realize they are just handing me the primary evidence I need to prove they never viewed me as a daughter, only as an asset to be harvested. "There," Lyle said, snatching the tablet back with a triumphant smirk. "Now you can just focus on getting better." They left as quickly as they had arrived, the click of the door echoing like a gavel. I waited until the house settled into its usual hollow silence. Late that night, the moon casting long, skeletal shadows across the hardwood floor, I pulled my laptop from beneath the bed. Every movement was a struggle against the pain, but the fire in my gut was stronger than the ache in my ribs. I synced the data from my high-tech cardiac monitor. Odin had insisted on the top-tier model, the one with an integrated environmental sensor designed for patients with high-stress triggers. It was meant to record heart rate spikes, but it did something else. It recorded the ambient audio surrounding those spikes to help doctors understand the trigger event. I opened the file from my time in the ICU. The waveform appeared on the screen, a series of jagged blue lines. I hit play. The audio was muffled at first, the rhythmic beep of the hospital equipment providing a steady backtrack. Then, I heard it. Lyle's voice, unmistakable and cold, coming from the hallway just outside my room. "The timing would actually be better if she didn't wake up, Dahlia," Lyle whispered. "The life insurance policy is $500,000. It covers the plaid model in full, with enough left over for Callista's spring collection. If she pulls through, we're stuck with a $10,000 bill and a lifetime of episodes." "I know, dear," Dahlia's voice followed, sounding more concerned about her reputation than my life. "But imagine the engagement on the Grieving Mother series. It would be a total brand reset." I stared at the screen, watching the blue lines dance as they recorded my parents wishing for my death. I didn't cry. The time for tears had ended on that restaurant floor. I simply realized that some people don't deserve the air you breathe. They had looked at my fading life and saw a down payment. What would you do if you found out the people who gave you life were waiting for you to lose it? Would you run, or would you stay to ensure they can never hurt anyone else again? I saved the audio file to 3 separate encrypted cloud drives, my hands steady and cold. I began the methodical process of auditing Lyle's public business filings for Vance Logistics. I cross-referenced his reported emergency losses with the date of my surgery. He had already started moving money, trying to claim my medical crisis as a business loss to avoid taxes. But he had made a fatal mistake. By forcing me to sign that restitution agreement, he had legally linked his personal finances to my future income. In his greed, he had inadvertently given me the legal standing of an interested party. In the eyes of Illinois law, I now had the right to audit his company books to ensure my future payments were being calculated correctly. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but justice is a boundary you set for others. I will not be a victim of their greed. I will be the architect of their accountability. Meredith's heart beats with a rhythmic, mechanical precision, a sound that echoes like a ticking clock marking the seconds until her family's built-in lies finally catch up to them. Every breath I took was a silent vow. I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. The sudden, impatient knocking didn't startle me. I no longer felt that familiar fear rising in my throat. I sensed the cold, rigid air of a plan finally coming to fruition. I had left the Vance mansion 48 hours after signing that unfavorable contract, retreating to a small, airy apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was a space filled with the smell of old wood and rain, a far cry from the fresh, filtered air of my childhood. A month had passed since my surgery, and although my body still ached from the recovery process, my mind had become as sharp as a precision instrument. I spent my nights watching the Chicago streets through a rain-slicked window. The city lights smeared into neon streaks on the asphalt, reflecting off the obsidian paint of the cars below. It didn't take long to spot the predator. A black Tesla Model S, Lyle's pride and joy, drifted past my building with the eerie silence of an electric ghost. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He was tracking me via the restitution app he had forced me to install, a digital leash disguised as a family safety tool. I knew I needed to move. I left the apartment, blending into the evening crowd, feeling the cool mist on my face. I led the silent shadow through the labyrinth of the loop, eventually ducking into a hidden narrow alley behind a row of industrial warehouses. This was where I was supposed to meet Odin. He was waiting for me near a rusted dumpster, his worn coat huddled against the wind. But we weren't alone. Before I could reach him, a pair of men in nondescript tactical gear stepped out from behind a delivery van. They were Lyle's security, the kind of muscle that operates in the gray areas of the law. They didn't come for me. They came for the man who saved me. I watched from behind a stack of crates, my breath hitching as they began a brutal, systematic assault on Odin. They weren't looking for money. They were trying to beat him into silence about the stolen inheritance. "Tell the girl to stop digging, old man," one of them growled, a heavy boot connecting with Odin's ribs. My vision blurred with a sudden searing rage, but I forced my hands to remain steady. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police, not yet. I remotely activated the high-definition security cameras of the electronics shop across the alley, a business I had recently consulted for in secret. The lens swiveled, capturing every strike, every grunt of pain, and most importantly, the black Tesla parked at the mouth of the alley with Lyle's silhouette clearly visible in the driver's seat. They think they can beat the truth out of a good man, but truth doesn't bleed. It only waits for the right moment to strike. I watched Odin curl into a ball, refusing to utter a single word that would betray me. I whispered a vow into the cold night air. I won't let his sacrifice be for nothing. Not this time. The men left as quickly as they appeared, the Tesla humming away into the rainy night. I rushed to Odin's side, his breathing ragged and wet. He looked up at me, a bloody smile touching his lips. "Did you get it?" he wheezed. I nodded, my heart aching with a profound, agonizing gratitude. I helped him to a safe house I had prepared, a place Lyle didn't know existed. The next morning, the counterstrike arrived. I was sitting in my apartment, sipping cold coffee, when a heavy pounding shook the doorframe. 2 police officers stood there, their faces grim. Lyle had preemptively filed a report, but he had gone further than I expected. He had used a falsified parental audit to claim I had embezzled $100,000 from Vance Logistics to pay for my elective heart surgery. "Meredith Vance? We have an arrest warrant for you," an officer said, holding up an altered copy of the contract I had signed. In their eyes, it looked like a full confession of financial fraud. I remained calm. I stood up slowly, the valve in my chest clicking with a steady, reassuring rhythm. I looked the lead officer in the eye, my voice devoid of the tremors that used to define me. A man who would frame his own daughter for a crime he knows she didn't commit is a man who has already lost everything that matters. I'll go with you, not because I'm guilty, but because I'm the only one here with nothing to hide. As they cuffed me, I signaled to a courier waiting across the street. He carried a pre-prepared legal packet my lawyer had drafted, a packet containing the forensic analysis of the duress marks I had hidden in my signature. The police precinct smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor wax. I sat in a cramped interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was a familiar pressure, a siege of my character that had started the day I was born. But I wasn't the same girl who had collapsed on that restaurant floor. While the detectives conferred outside, I used my one phone call. I didn't call a friend. I called an automated compliance server I had set up weeks ago. By entering a specific code, I triggered a comprehensive internal audit of Vance Logistics. Because of the restitution agreement Lyle had forced me to sign, I was legally an interested party with full access to his company's ledger. The audit didn't just find the embezzlement Lyle had blamed on me. It found something much bigger. Lyle had been using the Tesla's encrypted entertainment and communication system to facilitate offshore wire transfers. He had turned his pride and joy, the car he valued over my life, into a mobile money laundering hub. You cannot build a castle on a foundation of sand and expect the tide to stay out forever. My family built their palace on my pain, and now the tide is coming in. I watched the waveform of the data transfer on my phone screen before the detective confiscated it. It was beautiful. Is it revenge to tell the truth that destroys a liar? Or is it just the cost of their choices? Have you ever had to choose between staying silent to keep the peace and speaking the truth to save your soul? For the first time, I understood that silence wasn't peace. It was a prison. The distant wail of a siren echoed through the precinct walls, a sound that felt like an anthem for the justice I was about to claim. My heart beat with a rhythm as steady as a drum of war. I had spent 22 years as a ghost in my own home, invisible and discarded. But ghosts have a way of haunting the people who tried to bury them. The door opened, and a detective entered with a confused, almost panicked expression. He was holding a stack of papers that had just come off the precinct fax machine. Odin's testimony, the alleyway video, and the initial audit results. "Meredith," he began, his voice hesitant. "There's been a significant development." The air at the Vance estate was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying ozone of high-voltage ambition. It was the night of the grand unveiling, a gala Lyle had orchestrated to cement his status among Chicago's elite. I arrived uninvited, stepping out of a cab into the warm evening air, my suit tailored and sharp, a steel gray armor that felt worlds away from the thin hospital gown I had worn when they last saw me. In my hand, I carried an encrypted tablet, the digital weight of it more significant than any physical weapon. The jazz music from the garden drifted toward the gate, a superficial melody hiding the rot I knew was festering beneath the surface. I walked past the valet without a word, my rhythmic heartbeat steady and focused. The garden was a sea of silk dresses and tailored tuxedos, everyone gathered around a silk-draped shape that could only be the Tesla. Lyle stood at the center of the crowd, a glass of vintage champagne in one hand, the other gesturing grandly as he spoke of visionary logistics and strategic financial pivots. Dahlia stood beside him, her face a masterpiece of cosmetic preservation, her eyes darting around to ensure the photographers were capturing her best angles. Callista was nearby, her phone held high, live streaming the event to thousands of strangers who only knew the version of us that fit in a square frame. I didn't rush. I moved through the crowd like a silent auditor, watching the performance. When Lyle finally caught my eye, his smile didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a twitch of raw, visceral panic. I didn't wait for him to speak. I walked directly into the center of his circle, the crowd parting as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Meredith," Dahlia whispered, her voice a sharp, brittle glass. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting." I'm done resting, Mother, I said, my voice clear and amplified by the quiet that had begun to spread. I looked at Lyle, whose grip on his champagne glass was so tight his knuckles were white. I'm not here to ruin your party, Dad. I'm here to finish the audit you started when you tried to take my future. I've brought someone with me. I gestured to the edge of the property, where a man in a dark suit stood quietly. That's a federal marshal. He's here to serve notice that this house, this land, and every asset attached to Vance Logistics is now under a quiet title dispute. You shouldn't have linked your personal finances to my future income, Lyle. It gave me the legal standing to look into your books. And I found everything. The crowd murmured, the sound like dry leaves in the wind. Lyle's face turned a deep, mottled red. He attempted to laugh it off, turning to his guests with a frantic, sweating charm. She's troubled, as you all know. The heart surgery, the medication. She doesn't know what she's saying. Don't I? I asked, my thumb hovering over the tablet. Let's test the new car's security, shall we? Lyle had reached for the remote to unveil the Tesla, eager to distract his investors. But as he pressed the button, the car didn't hum to life. Instead, the headlights flickered a frantic red, and the dashboard began to wail a high-pitched alarm. The doors remained locked tight. I had alerted the financing bank to the truant tax payments Lyle had hidden, triggering a remote repossession protocol. The pride of his life was now a 2-ton paperweight. The IRS is very interested in the data link you installed in that car, Dad, I said, stepping closer. The one you used to bypass monitoring for your offshore logistics accounts. You didn't just build a mobile office, you built a mobile evidence locker. Lyle flew into a rage. He lunged at me, his face contorted with anger, finally shedding his fatherly composure. He waved a crumpled copy of the compensation contract, his voice a furious roar. You're my property. I raised you. I paid for your life, and you stole that money from my company. You're a thief, a despicable thief. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my posture straight, my eyes fixed on his. I spoke into the microphone on my lapel, my voice booming through the garden speakers so that every guest, every neighbor, and every one of Callista's followers could hear. A person is never a piece of property, Lyle. You taught me that my life was a waste of money. You taught me that my survival was a scheduling conflict. So I decided to spend my time making sure no one else has to pay for your lies. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, but truth is the only thing that can truly heal a broken heart. The crowd was silent now, a heavy, judgmental quiet that felt like the air before a storm. Dahlia's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the grass with a muffled thud. Even Callista had stopped filming, her mouth open in a rare moment of genuine shock. I am not my father's daughter tonight, I continued, my voice steady. I am a witness to his choices, and I have one more thing for everyone to hear. I hit play on the tablet. The audio from the ICU filled the garden, the rhythmic beep of the hospital monitor. And then, the cold whispered voices of my parents wishing I wouldn't wake up so they could collect the insurance. The recording was raw, visceral, and undeniable. It was the sound of a family choosing a car over a child. Silence is the liar's most powerful weapon. But when the truth shatters that silence, it destroys everything they've built. The silence in that room was louder than any scream. In the end, the truth was revealed. What would you do if the world finally heard what was said in your darkest hour? Would you be afraid? Or would you finally feel the weight lift from your shoulders? The flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers began to reflect off the polished, locked chrome of the Tesla. The jazz had stopped. The champagne was warm. I stood in the center of the wreckage of their reputation, feeling the mechanical, perfect beat of my heart. It was the only honest thing left in the garden. My family had finally run out of roads to hide on. The morning air at the Vance estate was tinged with the scent of lake salt and the end. 2 months had passed since the police car had illuminated the downfall of my father's reputation, and today, the heavy oak doors swung open for a different reason. A small group of suit-wearing investors and curious neighbors gathered on the lawn where I had spent my childhood trying to hide. The Chicago sun was a cold, pale disk in the sky, casting long shadows on the stone facade. I stood at the back of the group, breathing steadily, my heart beating with a quiet, mechanical strength that now felt all too familiar. Odin stood beside me. He was clean-shaven now, wearing a dark wool coat that didn't smell of the streets. His presence was a silent anchor, a reminder of the $10,000 sacrifice that had bought this moment. We watched as the auctioneer's voice droned on, a rhythmic tally of a life built on borrowed time and stolen legacies. Going once, going twice. The gavel hit the podium with a crack that echoed like a gunshot across the manicured lawn. Sold to the representative of Odin's Legacy Trust. I stepped forward through the parting crowd. Lyle and Dahlia stood on the sidewalk, their designer clothes looking wrinkled and out of place in the harsh morning light. They looked smaller than I remembered. The predatory fire in Lyle's eyes had been replaced by a vacant, desperate hollow. Dahlia wasn't holding a phone anymore. Her hands were occupied with clutching a single designer bag, the last remnant of her curated world. "Meredith!" Lyle's voice was a raspy ghost of the boom it once held. "What is this? What have you done?" "I've simply completed the transaction, Lyle," I said, handing my lawyer the final set of papers. "This house was built on a foundation of theft. I didn't buy it to keep it. I bought it because it's time these walls stood for something honest." Following the Illinois probate and foreclosure statutes to the letter left them with no room for a legal counterattack. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a check. It was a printed list of local homeless shelters and social service centers. "You once told me that a limp would teach me responsibility," I said, my voice calm and devoid of the bitterness that used to choke me. "I'm returning the lesson. Here is a list of places where you can start over. It's the same fate you offered me when I was bleeding on a restaurant floor. I suggest you move quickly. The new owners arrive at noon." Just as the reality began to sink in, 2 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Federal agents stepped out, their badges glinting in the cold light. Based on the evidence of money laundering and insurance fraud I had provided, the wheels of justice had finally ground their way to our doorstep. They approached Lyle and Dahlia with a purposeful, professional gait. "Lyle Vance? Dahlia Vance? You're under arrest for federal insurance fraud and wire tampering," the lead agent announced. I watched as the handcuffs clicked into place. There was no malice in my heart, only a profound sense of resolution. I didn't ruin them. I had simply stopped saving them from the consequences of their own choices. As the agent led Lyle toward the vehicle, he turned back, his face contorted in a final, pathetic plea. "I didn't ruin you, Lyle," I said, meeting his gaze one last time. "I just stopped saving you from yourself. I hope one day you find a life that doesn't require a camera lens to feel real." Callista stood by the gate, her Urban Pain brand a memory, her social media accounts deactivated by legal injunctions. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and panicked. "Meredith, please, I have nothing. Just a small loan for old time's sake?" I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I reached into my bag and handed her the card of a reputable job placement agency in the city. "They're looking for entry-level staff, Callista. It's time you learned the value of a dollar you actually earned." The SUVs pulled away, their tires crunching on the gravel. I turned to Odin and pulled a set of keys from my pocket. They weren't for the house. They were for the new mechanic shop we had opened in the West Loop, a state-of-the-art facility where he would never have to sell his tools again. "It's time to go home, Uncle Odin," I whispered. He took the keys, his hand trembling with a pride that made my throat tighten. An hour later, I was walking along the Chicago lakefront. The city skyline rose up like a forest of steel and glass, but it no longer felt like it was pressing down on me. I stopped by the water's edge, watching the golden light of the rising sun dance across the waves of Lake Michigan. My breathing was rhythmic, my heart beating with a vitality I once thought was a fairy tale. Revenge is a heavy burden, a fire that burns the person holding it as much as the target. I understood now that the best way to win wasn't to stay in the fight, but to outgrow the version of myself that needed the fight to begin with. I was finally enough. I took a deep, steady breath, the cool air filling my lungs. I looked at my reflection in the water, no longer a ghost, no longer an erasure. I was a woman who had walked through the fire and come out with a heart of steel and a spirit of peace. I wasn't running anymore. I was simply moving forward. Have you ever had to close a door to save your own soul? It is a terrifying thing to let go of the only family you know, even when they are the ones hurting you. But sometimes, the silence that follows is the only place where you can finally hear your own voice. Have you ever lived through a moment where the truth was the only thing you had left? Tell me your story. I am listening.